Maxine Waters sat completely paralyzed as Ted Cruz ruthlessly exposed her family's million-dollar political payout on live television. Her complexion drained completely as the Texas senator kept reading directly from official records. He detailed how her husband held $350,000 in one United Bank stock, how she personally set up the Treasury meeting, and how that exact bank walked away with $12 million in taxpayer bailouts. Waters remained frozen, entirely speechless. The lawmaker who controlled Washington's financial policies for over 3 decades was getting systematically dismantled on a live broadcast by the very man she brushed off as a mere junior senator. But how did things reach this point? Picture the scene exactly 45 minutes earlier. The absolute powerhouse of American finance strides into the Senate chamber, fully intending to embarrass another Republican rival in front of the whole country. She has never lost a financial debate. She has stared down powerful Treasury officials. This is supposed to be her ultimate victory lap. What she fails to realize is that the quiet lawmaker in the corner spent 3 weeks constructing an inescapable trap, and he is finally ready to spring it. This is the exact sequence of how constitutional expertise shattered 34 years of entrenched authority in less than 60 minutes. It shows how a Harvard law graduate, armed with a pocket constitution, took down a political giant. It reveals how one deeply prepared official reminded the Washington establishment that, in this country, nobody is above the rules. The Senate Banking Committee is broadcasting live across every network. Waters specifically called for this session to crush Republican financial opposition. She spots Cruz's name on the roster and scoffs. To her, he is just a rookie. She is the undisputed master. But Cruz spent the last 3 weeks digging. Ethics reports, financial statements, and constitutional overreaches. Every single piece is fully documented. As Waters confidently adjusts her microphone, Cruz opens his folder for the final time. The ultimate ambush is locked and loaded. Waters leaned forward aggressively, locking eyes with Cruz. It was the exact withering stare that historically made massive corporate executives stutter and backtrack. Her tone carried the heavy weight of a politician who never backed down from a fight, a veteran who wielded massive influence since before Cruz even entered the political arena. "Senator Cruz, I am genuinely curious," she stated. "What exactly qualifies a junior senator from Texas to lecture this committee on financial oversight? Did Harvard Law actually teach real banking mechanics? Or were you too distracted by abstract constitutional theories to grasp real-world economics?" The chamber shifted awkwardly. Waters just openly insulted a Harvard graduate's credentials for the entire nation to see. It was an aggressive opening move, perfectly calculated to force Cruz into a defensive posture and instantly secure her dominance. A few of her partisan allies nodded with clear approval. This was the fierce operator they knew, the relentless fighter who could slice through her opponents with surgical precision. But Cruz's smile never dropped. If anything, he looked almost amused as he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a battered, tiny booklet. It was the pocket constitution that served as his ultimate weapon throughout his career. "Congresswoman Waters, that is a deeply fascinating question," he responded, his Texas drawl making every single syllable sound heavy and intentional. "But let me ask you a question in return. What specific constitutional provision gives this Congress the absolute, unlimited power to regulate the American banking sector?" The question hung over the room like a heavy weight. Her highly confident expression faltered, just for a split second. But every camera caught that momentary flash of doubt. This was not the reaction she anticipated. Normally, her targets scrambled to defend their resumes, rattling off their qualifications while sweating under the pressure. Cruz, however, flipped the dynamic with absolute, chilling confidence. Waters stiffened in her seat, visibly annoyed by the sudden pushback. Her voice took on that sharp, aggressive edge that made her legendary among her allies. Senator, do not attempt to lecture me on constitutional authority. I have been protecting this document and defending working families for 34 years, while you have been playing petty political games down in Texas. Mom, with absolute respect. Cruz shot back, flipping his booklet open to a precise page without even looking down. I am not playing games. I am directly reading Article 1, Section 8, which explicitly outlines the 18 specific powers granted to this body. Financial regulation is not explicitly written in these powers. So, under what exact legal theory do you justify these massive bureaucratic agencies? Total silence washed over the room. This was not the easy victory Waters expected. Cruz was digging into the fundamental bedrock of federal authority, the exact type of questions she completely ignored during her 3 decades of expanding government control. Waters felt a genuine wave of anxiety. She spent her entire life assuming she had the power, never actually defending it against an expert who argued at the Supreme Court level. Her tone grew highly defensive. The Commerce Clause undeniably grants us the right to monitor financial institutions. That is basic, fundamental law, Senator. Cruz gave a patient nod, resembling a brilliant professor dealing with a remarkably unprepared student. The Commerce Clause permits Congress to handle interstate trade. Correct. But does that allow us to build a totally unaccountable agency armed with endless power, creating rules that act as strict laws without direct congressional approval? Because that sounds less like managing commerce and entirely like abandoning our legislative duty. He turned another page with flawless precision. You see, Congresswoman, James Madison clearly stated in Federalist 45 that the powers handed to the federal government are few and highly defined. So, where exactly did the founders define our ability to create unelected agencies that force binding regulations without explicit permission? Waters instantly realized she was trapped in dangerously deep waters. The Texas scholar was absolutely relentless. Worse, he was publicly exposing her complete lack of knowledge regarding the very document she swore to protect 18 separate times. Every single official sitting at that table realized they were watching history. A powerful committee leader was receiving a brutal, elementary legal lesson on live television. Senator Cruz, the Constitution is a living, breathing document. Waters snapped, desperately falling back on the tired talking points that protected her for years. The Founding Fathers could never have predicted modern financial structures. We must mold these principles to fit modern-day problems. It was the worst possible answer she could have given. Cruz's grin widened. He sensed complete weakness in her defense. Congresswoman, that is a highly creative interpretation. But if this document means whatever Congress wants it to mean at any given second, then it literally fails to limit government power at all. Doesn't it? You are practically arguing that the very Constitution you swore to protect is entirely meaningless the second it blocks your agenda. He leaned in, his voice projecting the absolute authority of a man who won massive cases at the highest court in the land. The founders predicted this exact power grab. That is why they wrote the 10th Amendment, which firmly states that powers not explicitly handed to the federal government belong to the states and the citizens. They absolutely knew that officials would constantly demand more power than they are legally allowed to hold. Waters was visibly rattled. 34 years of insider connections meant absolutely nothing against hard, factual legal expertise. She expected a standard debate over financial policies. Instead, she was suffering a brutal takedown by a man who mastered American law at its absolute peak. I do not require a lecture from you regarding these principles, she fired back, her ironclad composure fracturing for the first time in memory. I have fought for everyday workers and protected our system since before you even knew what politics was." "Mom," Cruz replied with chilling calmness, "fighting for the working class is deeply admirable. However, the law does not grant Congress the right to do whatever it randomly decides is best for the workers. It strictly grants specific, limited powers." He paused, letting the harsh reality settle over the room before delivering a crushing conclusion. "The brilliant core of our system is that it forcefully restricts government reach, even when that government claims to have noble intentions. Especially when it claims noble intentions, the founders deeply understood that the path to absolute control is paved by politicians who think their good ideas justify breaking constitutional boundaries." Round 1 was officially over, and the victor was undeniable. Waters walked straight into a legal shredder. Her trademark strategy of aggressive personal attacks and fake outrage completely failed against rock-solid legal facts. The financial powerhouse of Washington was getting dismantled by the very man she called unqualified. But Cruz was just warming up. The truly devastating evidence remained tucked inside his manila folder. Sensing complete disaster, Waters reacted the only way a cornered politician knows how. She launched an all-out assault, her voice echoing with the massive weight of 30 years of political fury. "Do not dare question my authority, Senator. At least I never sold out the working class to massive Wall Street donors like your allies do every single day. I spent my whole life defending the little guy, while you act as a shield for corporate greed." It was a highly calculated pivot. She desperately wanted to drag the fight away from legal facts, where she was humiliatingly outmatched, and drag it back into the mud of partisan shouting, where she felt secure. Her allies nodded eagerly. This was their fierce defender, striking back at her rival with absolute moral outrage. But it was a fatal miscalculation. Cruz's eyes practically glowed with predatory satisfaction as his fingers grabbed the manila folder. In one blind rush of anger, Waters stepped directly onto the exact landmine he spent 3 weeks carefully burying. She handed him the perfect excuse to annihilate her credibility forever. He flipped the folder open with slow, terrifying precision. The sound of shifting paper echoed loudly in the totally silent chamber. When he looked back up, his entire demeanor shifted from a polite professor to a ruthless, seasoned prosecutor. This was the razor-sharp litigator who argued 9 massive cases before the Supreme Court, and he was about to show everyone exactly why he dominated the courtroom. "Congresswoman, since you aggressively brought up protecting workers and dodging financial conflicts of interest, let us have a detailed conversation about One United Bank." The impact was immediate and utterly destructive. Waters's face turned ghost white. Her rigid, confident posture completely collapsed, looking as if she took a physical punch to the chest. She gripped the table, dreading the incoming facts. Every single journalist in that room instantly grasped what Cruz accomplished. He just dropped an inescapable political bombshell. The name One United hung over the room like a heavy sentence. Committee members shifted nervously, suddenly recalling the dark cloud surrounding that specific bank. Partisan staffers frantically whispered, unable to hide their intense panic. Waters' own team looked utterly desperate to run out of the room. Cruz grabbed a basic calculator and read directly from his stack of evidence, speaking with the cold, hard rhythm of a lawyer locking away a guilty defendant. For the citizens watching at home who might not remember One United Bank, let me offer the exact context. In September 2008, right as the market was collapsing, Congresswoman Waters personally set up a closed-door meeting between massive Treasury officials and representatives from this specific bank. He paused, forcing the heavy truth to settle while Waters sat completely paralyzed with dread. What she conveniently hid at the time, and what federal investigators later proved, was that her husband held $350,000 worth of stock in that exact bank and even sat on its board of directors for 4 years. Waters scrambled to interject, her voice cracking with pure desperation. That is deeply ancient history. The Ethics Committee totally cleared me after a massive review. Mom, kindly let me finish the facts, Cruz demanded, his finger tracking methodically down the official report. Following the meeting, you explicitly arranged a meeting where officials were shocked to see only one United represented. That specific bank walked away with $12 million in taxpayer-funded bailout money. He locked his eyes directly onto Waters's terrified face. Your family's massive investment was completely rescued. Your husband's stock avoided total collapse. The specific bank tied directly to your personal wealth got a massive taxpayer bailout directly following a meeting you personally engineered. The room fell into a dead, heavy silence, broken only by the frantic sound of reporters smashing their keyboards and cameras clicking endlessly. Waters looked as if she physically could not pull in oxygen, but Cruz was far from done. He ripped another glaring document from his stack. The facts get substantially worse. According to the House's very own ethics probe, your chief of staff, at that exact time, who just so happens to be your own grandson, was caught aggressively pushing to get this bank federal cash. Waters almost screamed her defense. My grandson did his job perfectly. There was zero improper conduct. Mom, Cruz cut her down instantly. Your grandson sent urgent messages specifically stating this bank was crashing. He handed their executives drafted legal loopholes. He acted as your direct proxy with their corporate officers. And he did all of this while your family held hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line. He punched a series of numbers into his calculator. Let me simplify the math for the public. $350,000 equaled roughly up to 15% of your entire family net worth. If that bank collapsed, as the investigators noted, your husband's massive payout would have hit absolute zero. The brutal precision of the math was unanswerable. Waters frantically tried to spin the narrative. I honestly believed I was aiding multiple institutions. I had zero idea they would exclusively focus on one United. Cruz struck back without an ounce of mercy. Mom, you personally demanded a meeting between federal officials and bankers, and you claim you had no idea which bank was showing up? Either you are completely lying to this committee, or you are openly admitting to massive, reckless negligence regarding federal conflicts of interest. Which one exactly is it? The impossible question hovered over her. There was no escape, and every single person watching knew it. Yet, Cruz kept pulling ammunition. Based on massive investigative reports from 2004, your immediate relatives pocketed over $1 million during your tenure by operating businesses directly tied to your political influence. Your own children constantly profited from your government access. His voice shifted into a tone of absolute, unbreakable moral authority. This is not about protecting the working class, Congresswoman. This is about systematically draining the system to enrich your own bloodline. You secured federal bailouts for your own investments. You placed your grandson in a power seat, and he secured government cash for groups that padded your family's bank accounts. Waters was visibly vibrating with a frantic mix of anger and absolute panic. You have zero right to smear my family. They did absolutely nothing wrong. I am not smearing anyone, Mom. Cruz replied with icy detachment. I am reading directly from public records, official ethics reviews, and massive investigative reports. The real question is, why do you believe your family is entitled to profit off your government position while you sit in that chair lecturing the rest of the country about corporate greed? He leaned back, his tone dropping into a conversational rhythm that made the absolute destruction feel even more brutal. You marched into this room accusing me of serving corporate masters. Yet, the hard factual evidence proves you personally rigged federal bailouts for your own financial gain. You handed your relatives a fortune using your influence. You turned a public office into a highly profitable family enterprise. The takedown was absolute. Waters sat completely muted, incapable of forming a single coherent defense. The lawmaker who constantly accused everyone else of corruption was just ruthlessly exposed as the ultimate symbol of everything the public despises about the Washington elite, using government access for massive private payouts, handing taxpayer cash to relatives, abusing federal power to protect personal wealth. With her credibility totally shredded, Waters lunged for one final, desperate escape hatch. Her voice shook wildly as she grabbed the last political weapon available. How dare you attack my integrity when your allies fueled the January Capitol breach? You want to preach about breaking the rules? Let us discuss your side, actively attempting to shatter this democracy and pushing hostility against the government. It was a completely desperate gamble, thrown by a politician watching her legacy burn to the ground. She prayed she could drag the spotlight onto the January 6th chaos, hoping to score cheap political points. But Cruz anticipated this exact move. His cold smile returned as he pulled yet another file from his endless stack. He prepared for this precise deflection, and he was ready to deliver the absolute final blow. He shifted his posture, morphing back into the devastating legal expert, ready to deliver a takedown the Senate would remember for decades. Congresswoman, let us aggressively examine your claims regarding hostility and rule-breaking. When I spoke during that January session, I explicitly laid out the legal process for challenging votes, the exact same legal process your own allies utilized in 2001, 2005, and 2017. I strictly demanded peaceful, lawful action within our legal boundaries. He held up a highlighted transcript. But let us heavily examine your personal history of pushing the limits. In April 2021, you stood directly in front of crowds in Minnesota, a city suffering from massive, destructive street clashes, and you declared, and I quote your exact words, "We have got to get more confrontational. We have got to make sure that they know that we mean business." The words hit the chamber like a shock wave. Waters tried to shout over him, but Cruz pushed forward like a freight train. That was not a peaceful gathering, ma'am. That happened during active, violent unrest. Neighborhoods were being wrecked, stores were getting gutted, authorities were taking hits, and you explicitly ordered the crowds to get more confrontational. He slammed down another paper, and that was not an isolated slip. In June 2018, you commanded your followers in Los Angeles, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they are not welcome anymore, anywhere. Waters scrambled to cover her tracks. I was demanding peaceful action. I never pushed for any hostility. Mom. Cruz fired back with crushing logic. What exactly did you assume would happen when you ordered crowds to become more confrontational during active, dangerous street clashes? What exactly did pushback mean when you specifically pointed targets at individual officials? Either you are incredibly clueless about the massive danger of your own words, or you knew exactly what chaos you were fueling. He brandished one final sheet of paper. Following your direct orders, multiple officials were aggressively targeted and cornered in public spaces. A Homeland Security secretary was chased out of a restaurant by crowds screaming your exact phrases. A White House advisor was ambushed while eating. I was personally surrounded and threatened by an aggressive mob while dining with my wife. His voice locked in with pure authority. Your direct orders resulted in stalking, threats, and absolute confrontation. You engineered a highly toxic environment where rivals could not walk outside without facing a mob. That is not peaceful, Congresswoman. That is calculated, systematic, political intimidation. Waters physically trembled. I never ordered anyone to be aggressive. I fully support peaceful action. Then explain to this room, Cruz demanded, slicing through her excuse. Why did you explicitly tell crowds to get confrontational while cities were actively suffering from unrest? Why did you demand your followers form mobs to physically push back on specific targets? Why did you completely refuse to demand calm, peaceful dialogue instead of actively pushing for escalation? He leaned closely into the microphone for the absolute finish. You see, Congresswoman, there is a massive, unbreakable difference between our actions. When I took the floor, I demanded strict legal processes and entirely peaceful actions within the bounds of the law. When you grab a microphone, you demand street clashes, you order the stalking of government workers, and you demand more confrontation while American neighborhoods are getting destroyed. His voice dropped to a razor-sharp whisper that echoed loudly across the dead-silent room. One of us actually respects the boundaries of the law. The other believes securing political power justifies using any ruthless tactic necessary. Waters sat frozen, but Cruz was not walking away. He was ready to seal the destruction permanently. Let us review the undeniable facts. You held office for 34 years. During that massive stretch, you landed on the official most corrupt politicians watch list 4 separate times. You personally orchestrated federal payouts to rescue your family's investments. You systematically enriched your relatives using your government access, handing them over $1 million in political cash. You repeatedly demanded the aggressive harassment of your political targets. He delivered his final ruling like a judge dropping the gavel. You are no champion for the working class. You are exactly the type of corrupt operator the Founding Fathers desperately tried to prevent, a lifelong politician who completely forgot that in this country, nobody is above the rules, and nobody is inherently entitled to hold power. He snapped his manila folder shut. You spent 3 decades hoarding influence and cashing in on your seat, but you completely forgot that authority in this nation is strictly meant to be temporary, highly accountable, and entirely limited by the law. You became the exact monster this system was designed to stop. Waters sat in total, devastating silence. Her jaw hung slightly open, incapable of stringing a single sentence together. 34 years of ruthless political dominance were just totally, entirely vaporized in front of millions of viewers. The official who strutted in as the undisputed kingpin of financial policy was now reduced to a glaring, humiliated example of unchecked political corruption. The Texas official proved to the entire nation that raw legal facts still brutally overpower entrenched, arrogant politicians. The heavy silence following his final sentence was utterly suffocating. Veteran journalists sat entirely motionless, shocked by the sheer magnitude of the takedown. Politicians from both sides refused to move, terrified to break the massive tension Cruz just built. Waters stared blankly at her desk, looking absolutely hollowed out. The legendary enforcer of Washington banking looked completely broken in a way nobody ever witnessed. The committee chairman nervously cleared his throat. "We will take a short recess," he muttered, sounding completely lost. The normal, polite closing statements felt totally pointless after the absolute execution they just watched. The second the broadcast lights cut off, the chamber erupted into pure madness. Reporters bolted for the exits, screaming into their phones, fully aware they just captured the biggest political demolition of the decade. Partisan allies surrounded Waters, their expressions caught between massive panic and total defeat. They watched their strongest fighter get systematically shredded, and the damage was entirely permanent. Outside, her press team drowned under an avalanche of media requests. "No comment," they yelled, completely failing to hide the absolute panic in their voices. Her media director frantically dialed allies, begging for a spin strategy. But how do you spin hard, documented facts, and official ethics reports? Her grandson, the exact staffer exposed during the brutal hearing, stood frozen against the hallway wall, realizing the One United scandal was about to dominate the front pages once again. The family hustle was totally exposed. Social media instantly exploded. The hashtag about Waters getting dismantled shot to #1 nationwide. Clips of Cruz's ruthless legal traps spread like absolute wildfire. The precise second Waters realized Cruz had the One United Bank files, the sheer, unfiltered terror on her face became a massive, unstoppable viral phenomenon. Critics scrambled to deflect, but the hard evidence was too brutal to hide. Every single network was forced to broadcast the footage. Some tried to downplay the hit, but the raw, brutal clips of the banking trap, the family payouts, and the final chilling silence spread faster than any news desk could contain. Veteran analysts struggled to find a comparable political takedown in modern history. The sheer, systematic precision of the trap was completely unmatched. Conservative leaders instantly rallied behind the flawless performance. They realized Cruz just handed them the ultimate playbook. If you want to crush the entrenched establishment, you don't just yell, you bring the hard documents, you memorize the exact laws, and you refuse to flinch. Cruz proved that deep, factual knowledge is the most terrifying weapon you can bring to a political knife fight. The political shockwave was permanent. Waters completely lost her leverage. How could she ever grill an executive about corruption when her own million-dollar family payouts were fully exposed? How could she debate rules when she proved she had zero understanding of fundamental laws? The progressive wing faced a massive crisis. If their most entrenched, aggressive financial watchdog was actually running a corrupt family enterprise, who else was hiding massive scandals? Heavy donors quietly backed away, completely dropping her name from their campaigns. Meanwhile, Cruz's office was completely overrun with demands for appearances. The Texas senator transformed instantly from a controversial outsider into the ultimate conservative powerhouse. He proved that fighting with hard facts and relentless preparation destroys decades of arrogant, corrupt power. Law schools began playing the clips, showing exactly how to trap a hostile witness using nothing but their own failures. The American public got a massive, unforgettable reality check. The hearing proved that entrenched politicians constantly bend the rules to protect their own wealth, hiding behind fake outrage and partisan shouting. Cruz ripped the mask off the entire operation. He proved that when you force corrupt officials to actually explain their legal authority, their entire empire collapses in minutes. Maxine Waters walked into that room as an untouchable powerhouse. She walked out as a broken, humiliated reminder that political arrogance eventually meets a hard, factual wall. Ted Cruz walked in with nothing but a folder and a tiny booklet. He walked out, proving that in America, hard evidence and relentless legal precision will always utterly destroy corrupt, entrenched power.